Here we are, we're the R Validation Hub, and today's workshop/discussion is going to be about open quality assessment. In the past, the R Validation Hub has been really focused on how we measure quality, but we haven't really focused on doing this as an entirely public initiative. So we're really now focusing on how do we do this as an open initiative, and I'll talk more about how we're thinking about this problem today. And what that looks like in terms of revamping our tools and the ambitions for what we want to build as services, more so than just tools themselves. So first, a bit about me. I'm originally a bioengineering PhD. I'm many years away from that part of my life at this point, but I'm still a scientist at heart. I enjoy making things. That includes software, but not always software. Recently, I've been slowly learning watercolor and printmaking. And on my social media, you can see things that I post where those two worlds collide. And I do science about printmaking. So these are just kind of my impromptu little experiments. I also like dabbling in really kind of like wild projects that are completely unrelated to validation. So here's a web tool that I built to run the R language. And so you can pull that up in your browser at this URL and kind of play around with my implementation of R, which is still buggy and incomplete, but you're welcome to see kind of how far I got with that. I'm also a lifelong open source advocate, and in the world of pharma, as soon as there are open source problems to be tackled, I'm usually right on the trail of those, and that is largely how I got into this whole world of validation. So in pharma, one of the big hurdles that was really apparent, really was the impetus for our pharma back in 2018, is that at the time there were certainly fears about the compliance side of using R. It was really unclear whether or not R was a sustainable language for the industry. And I saw those as problems that could really be solved by these open source initiatives. So that's why I started getting involved, and that kind of brings me to the R Validation Hub. So what do I do at the R Validation Hub? I've been participating since its start. It started in R Pharma at Harvard University back in 2018 at one of the in-person events. At the time, it was a small conference, only 100, 150 people. And so it was kind of a small atmosphere, and it really fostered these types of initiatives, people coming together to discuss problems that were near and dear to their heart. Everyone was really passionate about the R language and wanted to see open source used in the pharma world at that time. How we got there was kind of unclear. And so that year, Andy Nichols, now at the time, he was kind of coming to the R Pharma with this intention to try to standardize how we approach validation. And he launched this project, R Validation Hub, that year. I jumped on that because I thought that was a really positive way for me to get back to the industry. And at the time, I was daft enough to insist that not only can we specify some best practices around R, but they could also be systematically and automatically assessed. And so we spent a couple of years building our first software product called Risk Metric. And at this point, maybe most people have heard about this. We've been kind of on the campaign trail with this one for quite a while. And that, I think, has kind of like served its purpose. At the time, the goals for Risk Metric were really that scientists, statisticians could communicate with the tech leads and the leadership about how to measure quality software. And in conjunction with the white paper, you can show this trail of evidence that would allow you to make the case for installing that and making it available within your organization. So that's kind of served its purpose. Individuals have been using this more and more. It got quickly adopted to kind of make these claims. And then it started showing its age. So Risk Metric then kind of became this tool that administrators wanted to use to start systematically approving software or reviewing software for their to draft their validation documentation in-house. And that's where it started showing its kind of rough edges, because it wasn't really entirely designed with that use case in mind. It's kind of been contorted into that use case. And it's long been kind of an area where we wanted to tighten the bolts on this project. And so we did a lot of work to try to make it more flexible to those use cases. And I'd say it's serving those needs all right. I wouldn't say it's like a glowing application yet. And so fast forward to 2023, Andy Nichols moved on to another career opportunity, and I took over as the R Validation Hub chair. And at that point, I was again daft enough to think that maybe it wasn't enough for us to just produce this software package. Maybe we should actually do this as a public service and like put this out there similar to what CRAN does. We want to provide these metrics also off the shelf so that people can start making decisions about validated packages. So that's where we're at today. And to try to put that into motion, we've spent the last couple of years really primarily focused on this project that we call a metric repository, or a metric database is maybe a more apt name for it, so we don't kind of muddy the waters with this repository terminology. And so that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, because that's really kind of the next level of what we're planning to do. So if you aren't familiar with our Validation Hub, I did want to highlight a few of the other projects that we have going on that aren't necessarily our metric repository before I really focus on it. So like I said, we grew out of R Pharma in 2018. We're led by participants by about 10 organizations, and we have occasional involvement from health authorities. These days, less so. I think that the primary outlet that the FDA participates right now is our consortium's submissions working group, which is also great because we've been working with them to put together pilots, and then that also is kind of a nice conduit for us. So it's also time effective for health authorities to be focusing their attention through one avenue. Nevertheless, interactions with health authorities are really the driving motivator for us to continue, and what steers our work. We also have subscribers from a bunch of different organizations spanning multiple industries. This number is probably higher than this now. And yeah, a lot of people subscribe to our newsletters, occasionally join our calls. And it's really cool to hear, especially when other industries come in from finance or agriculture and talking about what are their regulatory needs and how is our tooling, how could it be adapted to address those problems? So lots of representation. To cover some of the products that we've produced over the years, we started with a white paper that came out within a year or two of the group forming. And that's still today considered more or less the standard on what the health authorities are looking for in terms of validation of our packages in particular. The guidelines that we set out in that white paper are not necessarily specific to R, although the applications that we draw from, the examples we draw from are specific, but it very easily could be adapted to other languages. And we've heard from health authorities. I think it's very rare that the health authorities will come out and concretely say that that is enough, but they've said that when they see people adopting this, that's usually a good sign. So we kind of have this, I'd say, a tacit endorsement. We also have these products along the bottom. Risk metric, I mentioned. Eric Millman, I'm going to give him a shout out. He's kind of moved on to bigger and brighter things, but he, for a long time, was really the lead maintainer of this package. So I wanted to give him acknowledgement here. Risk assessment is another great app, or another great product that we have. It's a shiny application, an interface to risk metric, and it supports additional features like reviewing packages and all of their heuristics, annotating them, cataloging them, setting up guidelines for the different criteria. So you have kind of like a rules-based inclusion criteria for packages. That's led by Aaron Clark, who we saw in the chat, and Jeff Thompson. We also have some other cool projects. Risk score is kind of an interesting one. I don't want to put too much emphasis on this one because I don't know if Aaron considers this something that he wants to be maintaining long-term, but Aaron, on a whim, I think in the lead up to a conference, decided, you know what, maybe I'll just review all of CRAN and then throw those metrics up in a data package. And I just thought that was awesome. Just like taking the tools, providing something useful. These days, I don't think it's been updated in a while. Maybe Aaron's has an update for us. They can drop in the chat. But I think it's a cool initiative, and he has some other work going on to maybe showcase how you can do that in a more systematic way and provide the tools for that. But I won't put that work in progress up quite yet. That's something to kind of watch this space for. Also, the communications workstream is really the backbone of how we engage with people. So we run quarterly seminars where you're welcome to come join us and chat. We run occasional mailers, although we really prioritize getting people in webinars and discussing. And that's a great way to feedback concerns or areas that we should be focusing on back to us, or hear from what other companies are doing as far as validation and the applications that they have. And last but not least, Colleen Zeballos, I should have mentioned Jackson, Anucha, and Antal are really the leads behind the communication. And last but not least, Colleen Zeballos has been spearheading our repository workstream, where we are building a public validation-ready resource for our packages, where we catalog all of these metrics that we've been calculating for years. So that was a big whirlwind tour. We're really just going to be focusing on this one, the repositories for today. That's really where a lot of our attention has been placed. And really, I think that's going to reshape a lot of the landscape that we have for these tools. So I'll talk a little bit more about that too. And we're quietly growing. So a little sneak peek where there's other stuff that's not shown here. We'll get to that later. What to expect today? So we're going to give some background for who we are, what we've been up to in the last few years, an introduction to some of our in-development tools, and the new foundations for our Validation Hub risk assessment. I'll do a few demos. We're going to run through some vignettes that we have. They're all online already, so if you are so inclined, you can pull those projects and run through that code yourself. And we'll introduce this concept of metric repositories. My goal is that we finish this material within the first hour and leave about an hour or more for discussion. So as you're listening in, I think we have plenty of time if you want to interrupt. If anyone wants to raise their hand and ask questions along the way, that should be totally fine. I might cut us off if that gets really off the rails. But the goal is that we also have a discussion period at the end. So if you have questions that aren't necessarily explicitly tied to the material we're covering at the moment and want to save those to the end, please save those questions. And we look forward to having kind of a broader community discussion about validation and what it means and what we can do to help. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Our year in review. If you've been watching this space from an outsider's view, I imagine it looks a little bit like this. It doesn't look like we're growing super fast. Risk metric development has stalled a bit. Risk assessment has been stable for a while. Maybe if you're watching those tools, you're looking for updates, maybe things feel like they've kind of stagnated. However, what is going on beneath that is that we've actually, we're preparing ourselves with new routes. We're growing out our root system. We have new tools being developed kind of in the background. Maybe they're not super visible from the surface, but things are definitely growing. And what we're hoping is that with these new routes, we're really ready to, abusing my metaphor, to be repotted. So the goal is that these are really priming us to do something bigger, better, more committed, I think, than anything that we've done in the past. So if you've been just seeing the surface, just like passively hearing about what we've been up to, maybe you haven't heard a lot yet. And my goal here is to change your mind. So what exactly has been happening? It really started back in April. There's no expectation that anyone's able to read any of this. I think it's too blurry anyway, so that don't feel like you need to zoom in and try to interpret any of this. But to suffice it to say, we met for, I think it was a 3 or 4 hour developer day meeting. We got a bunch of people that participated in the development of risk metric, risk assessment, or have been chiming in about features that they're looking for. We got them all together to try to really plan what is it that we need these tools to do. And it was really productive. I think that across the board, there were quite a few design decisions that have been constraining our further development for some time. And it was really nice to get people together and decide on exactly what we need to do to really realize the ambitions that we had. So I just have kind of the excerpts of our decisions that we came away with, and I'll cover those in a more intelligible font size in a few slides. So, or I guess in one slide. So the decisions that we walked away with were, first, we wanted to commit to something that we call a no guessing strategy. This phrase, no guessing, I think I first heard it used by Colin at Jumping Rivers. And it's really kind of the corollary to the way the risk metric tries to approach things, which is very guessing. It doesn't guess, but it does try to do something. It tries to find you an answer as best it can. And what that means is that sometimes when you get an answer from risk metric, it might not reflect exactly the way that you want that answer to be derived. For instance, if you just give it a package name and you don't have that package installed in your system, risk metric tries to get you that information regardless, and it will go out to CRAN and might scrape the CRAN webpage. Or if it finds like a GitHub URL in the package description, it might go out to GitHub and try to find you something like code coverage. However, code coverage is a finicky heuristic, and the way that how I calculate code coverage on my system or my enterprise's system might not produce exactly the same results as how the whatever system produced a badge on GitHub. So we're trying to now endorse a strategy that's no guessing. We don't want any ambiguity. We want to really get concrete answers to all these questions, because we want this to be something that people can base regulatory decisions on, not just something that a statistician might make an initial case for. There were ways, I should caveat that if you're using risk metric, there are certainly ways to put these guardrails on, but maybe if you're not aware of those guardrails, it's unintuitive. So I just want to make sure that, like, one of the changes here is that we want to be no guessing by default. We also want to focus on facts and not opinions. This is kind of another set of buzzwords that we've been throwing around that communicates a broader idea. Metrics, how we talk about them in risk metric, everything gets scored on a range from 0 to 1. And that means that if you have 1 million downloads, which is one of the heuristics that we pull, your package has been downloaded from CRAN, or actually posits CRAN mirror 100 or 1 million times. We might say that's low risk. That's enough downloads. But here we've codified our opinion about what enough downloads should be. And really what we want to focus on is the facts. And the fact isn't that this is enough downloads. That's more of an opinion. What we want to give you is the number itself. And that's a fact. We can say from this, they've reported this. We can say that that is the amount of downloads that it has, and you can make a decision from that. On the more technical side, those are really two of the core kind of design decisions, or maybe philosophical decisions, I should say. And then there's technical decisions that we made at the same meeting. This is going to get a little in the weeds, so my apologies if this is more technical than you signed up for. But for the technical folks in the crowd, in risk metric, we rely on S3 dispatch and double dispatch, which is maybe a little even more esoteric. It's really a convoluted design pattern for building packages. People have been great about contributing to this style, but it is a little bit of a barrier. And if you're not familiar with what's going on, I think it ends up looking more like pattern matching to contribute a feature than it is like consciously understanding how your tooling is integrating. And that just like adds a barrier to contribution. So S7 actually does this feature called double dispatch out of the box. And so we can just use that tooling. It's well documented. It means that there isn't this like separation between you and the code that you're contributing. Makes everyone's lives easier, and hopefully makes our developers feel more in touch with the package as a whole. And I think that just helps everyone feel like a shared sense of maintenance over this tool. Another thing that risk metric does that was a little problematic at times is that it tries to capture logs of everything that it runs. And the way that we do that is maybe a little too aggressive. So that's one of the things that we're trying to avoid now. And the other thing that we're trying to do is we want to keep data co-located. So one of the challenges that sprung up, I'd say especially in our risk assessment app, is that the app itself kind of maintains this database of how to document the metrics. And really, we want that information tied to the metrics. So instead of putting that work on the Shiny app to keep themselves in sync with the metrics that are being produced by RiskMetric, we want all of that kind of logged when you're producing a metric, and I'll talk about how that looks today. And then I'm going to do a ... here. There's this last one is a decision that we decided, but it really affects the broader ecosystem more than it affects strictly the backend tooling. So because at this point we knew that we wanted to be building a database of metrics that is publicly available, we've already put a lot of thought into how we distribute that information. And I'll talk about this in a little more depth later on, but when you go out and pull packages from CRAN, it downloads this all caps packages text file, or in some cases a compressed version of it, but we won't get into the weeds on exactly how that information makes its way to your R session. Suffice it to say, the information in this packages file makes its way to your R session, and that tells your session, these are the packages that are available on CRAN. And one of the things that's really nice about this is that you can also add a bunch of other metadata to that file. And that is a really convenient way for us to distribute information in a way that your R session or your users, if you're an administrator or you as a statistician, you can get all this information about packages, things like how many times it was downloaded, if you'd like to make a decision on whether or not that meets the cut for the types of packages you want to be using. And there's some really cool stuff that we can do with that to kind of integrate it really closely into your statistician's workflow or your programmer's workflow or your administrator's workflow. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but I want to highlight all of these. Suffice it to say, kind of in summary, we really looked holistically at what was working with these packages and wanted to double down on things that are working well and really reflect on the things that we thought could be improved. And that's really a kind of like a level of license that we haven't really granted ourselves with RiskMetric in quite a while, because it is now used by quite a few organizations. And so this gave us an opportunity to reflect on all of those decisions and think about what we want to do next. So what did we do? We don't want to break RiskMetric. Because there are people that are using it. We want to leave that as stable as it can be for those organizations to use. Instead, we decided to start a new family of packages. And we're trying to be a lot more explicit about what each of these packages do so that there isn't this ambiguity about where things should live. So I'll talk through what each of these packages will be doing. Most of these are R packages, but not all of them. So the ones in the middle here are explicitly not R packages. They're kind of more like services, but I'll get to that in a second. So the first one, and probably the most important one, if you're coming from RiskMetric, is Valmeter. For most intents and purposes, it is the replacement to RiskMetric. However, RiskMetric also had a few kind of like bells and whistles that are being distributed across a few of these other tools. So the most important is that we're no longer scoring packages. That is a big part of RiskMetric, is this convergence on a 0 to 1 scale. We don't really want to be the decision makers on that because it's been fairly controversial about how things go from downloads, as the example I gave earlier, now into the 0 to 1 scale. How many is enough downloads? That was all customizable, but reality has shown us that, or I guess people using this in practice has shown us that most folks do not customize that scoring mechanism. So we want to abandon that and make that really a conscious part that people have to opt into. Speaking of, Val filter, and I gotta apologize. We're still working on kind of the holistic branding of this. You'll see this package referred to as Val filter and occasionally Val criterion. Exactly. Thank you, Luis. So these ones are still up in the air, but regardless of which name, they're both referring to the same thing. What they're used for is providing that mechanism of scoring. Or rather, more specifically, we're kind of moving away from numeric scores and now we just care about inclusion criteria. So that could be you have to meet this level of inclusion to be installed, or if you've used the risk assessment app and you've categorized things as low, medium, and high, in the risk assessment app, you can add these kind of conditions, and that can also be absolutely implemented in val filter, val criterion. So that logic now lives over here. One of the other features that was a little bit redundant is that some folks wanted reports that were generated by GitHub Actions. Some folks wanted reports that were generated through the risk assessment app. And in either case, we thought that meant we should really have that as a separate package. So there's one package now that takes these facts and produces reports. And whether or not you're doing that from metrics that you're calculating locally using ValMeter, metrics that you're pulling from a repository, or metrics that or a report that you're generating through a dashboard like risk assessment, all of these reports the intention is that they're all using the same underlying tooling. That's all in progress, but that's how we envision things moving forward. I'm going to talk about this last one at the bottom, and then we'll jump back to what's going on in the middle here. So I mentioned risk assessment. That's our ongoing Shiny app. For now, that's still the go-to source for Shiny apps if you want to deploy one for doing review and assessment. This package doesn't actually exist yet, but our intention is to re-architect things once all the other pieces are fairly concrete, so that we have a new revitalized dashboard that pulls all of those pieces into play. So let's look at this part that's going on in the middle. One of the things, I mean, really what we're trying to build towards is this repository. And the introduction of this repository has been the impetus for why we revamped everything in the first place. The Val repo will contain a set of GitHub actions that are necessary for building a public metric database. And this architecture allows us to, as a service, using GitHub Actions, we can now start populating one of these packages file with up-to-date metrics that are packages that are being pulled from CRAN. In addition to that, we also want tools. We're fully aware that not everyone's workflow relies solely on tools coming from public repositories like CRAN. If you're at a small, or if you're at a large organization, you almost certainly have additional tools that are built for your specific needs that are private. And probably if you're at a small organization, you have a handful of these as well. So you're probably working with a handful of local tools that are not on CRAN. We also want to provide you with the tools for managing our metric database if you have to deploy it in-house. So we're very much thinking about this architecture in a way where it's extendable, both in terms of adding your own in-house packages, but also adding your metrics. And I'll get to exactly what that looks like later on. So in terms of deliverables, we're thinking about this in terms of a few different roles. If you're an analyst and you just want to say, I'm doing this workflow, I want to impose this constraint for myself, then you might say, I'm going to set some filter. And if I ever try to install a package that doesn't meet my self-proclaimed expectations, then I'm going to get a warning, or I'm going to, in this case, it's going to initially error and you have to opt into using that package explicitly. So that's kind of a guardrail that you can set for yourself. You could also imagine an administrator using these tools to impose an organization-wide filtering policy before maybe if they have analysts or statisticians coming to them, the statisticians, data scientists, your organization's title of choice, going to an administrator and asking to install a package. An administrator can say, okay, that meets this criteria, follow more or less a flow chart. Maybe you might set up a business process where if it's in some gray zone, you want like a domain expert to review it. But these kind of expedite that process and give you a more consistent set of tools for doing that. And if you need to drop over to a reviewer, maybe you want these kind of more manual checks, that's where the dashboard come in. This is very similar to risk assessment. So if you've worked with a risk assessment for doing package review, our intention is to keep that workflow largely the same, but now draw on these other tools for kind of handing off some of the heavy lifting that it was doing, especially when trying to define criteria or output reports. And we have a few other kind of like bells and whistles in mind for how to make that a more convenient experience and hopefully easier to maintain. The other, of course, part party in this relationship is the health authority. And we want to make sure that we're producing effective documentation that could be reviewed by a health authority and show that these packages live up to all these constraints that you've applied. We want to document that really thoroughly. So all of these serve those kind of multitude of users. And our idea with this is that by breaking it up in this way, we can start reusing components more easily and serve all of these needs. All right, so this is the part where we get to test the demo gods. I'm going to run through a few different vignettes. And so I think the links have already been dropped in the chat from what I see. I'm going to run through some vignettes that are from a few of these new and upcoming packages. And we can talk through things. So if I see questions in the chat, I'll be watching as close as I can. If you have questions about how things work, I don't mind going off the script a little bit. We can talk a little bit more about some of these things. So let me hop over to our studio. Cool, I'm seeing it. Let's start off with, we have a whole vignette that's devoted to comparison with risk metric. So unfortunately, the titles aren't getting displayed in this viewer, but we have a whole vignette that's, if you're coming from risk metric, we want to tell you what is changing. So I want to start there. Valmeter builds on everything that risk metric has done, and we want to carry that forward. We want to improve on those ideas. So there's a couple places where the design philosophy has changed. You'll see we went over really this in some detail. I won't belabor it here, but we want to be precise. That's kind of the no guessing part. We want to be reproducible. And if anything is not reproducible, our validation hub wants you to be able to opt into things that might not be reproducible. So I consider downloads to be one of these metrics that is not reproducible. Tomorrow, probably more people will have downloaded a package. So you can't just rerun it and expect to get the exact same number. And this is a way of you telling us, actually, I want those. I realize they're not totally reproducible, but I think that would help us. So for those, we want those to be opt-in. That might include things like transient metrics, things like downloads. We will also want it to be unopinionated. So in this way, we want to remove this kind of concept of trying to refine everything down to a 0 to 1 scale. I won't belabor that because we've already talked about it in a lot of detail. So let's see it in action. If you've used risk metric, the workflow looks largely the same. You load Valmeter, you run some code to declare that we want to pull that package. In this case, we're being a lot more prescriptive. So I have Valmeter installed, so we're able to find it. It looks for installed packages first, and we're able to see all of the different metrics that we're able to pull. I'm not going to belabor all the internals here, but similar to risk metric, things kind of get computed lazily, and there's a graph that effectively gets computed. So there's kind of interdependence here. That's why they all say that they're promises. I promise that I will be able to calculate this if you ask me to, but we're not going to go into the details of that quite yet. However, and here I'm just going to run all. Just there's some R Markdown kind of tricks going on here. We're not evaluating this. This is, in the world where this isn't installed, we would get this error message. We're unable to discover that package resource. And if we were using risk metric, what we would do here is we'd go out, we'd say, okay, you want to learn about Valmeter. We're going to go out to CRAN and we're going to try to pull Valmeter for you. And maybe it would look at the CRAN webpage, maybe it would pull some information from GitHub. We don't want any of that like guesswork to be happening here. We want it to be explicit. When it's not installed, you're out of luck. You can still get information from those places, but you have to be explicit. You have to explicitly tell us that you're okay to pull information from that. And the way that we would do that is by specifying a policy. So here we have Valmeter. We could specify a policy here. And a policy really dictates what types of sources you feel comfortable pulling packages from, what permissions they should have. So you have to opt into allowing things to execute. If you, for instance, are on an enterprise server and you don't want to be just executing arbitrary code to run a package's R command checks or a test suite, that's a good impulse. We want to encourage you to follow that impulse. And so you have to opt into it. So you have to be aware that you're giving arbitrary code permission to run on your system if you're pulling from an external resource and allowing it to execute code. So yes, we also want kind of more assertive behaviors. So when packages are installed, we need to grant them permissions. I mentioned that that was one of the components of this policy that we needed to set. You can also set that when you're calculating specific metrics. And we also want to be more descriptive. So I mentioned that we want more of the information bundled with the metric. And so if we look at metrics, in particular here, we'll look at the number of downloads that we pull. We'll see that it comes with a bunch of different information. This is just the information that gets spit out into the command line. You'll see we have the total number of downloads. It tells you what the type will be. It has a little description. That's lovely. And then it has some tags. So, downloads are transient. They indicate good adoption. They are version independent. So downloads are not like if I'm looking at downloads for dplyr, it's not necessarily dplyr, 1.2.3. It's all of the versions of dplyr. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. That we just want to give you the information to make that decision more effectively. And if you wanted to pull this, you need to give it permission to access the network. You need to give it the permission to go out and fetch this information because it's going to be querying the web. And that's also a little bit of a security concern, something to be aware of. So we just ask that you give it explicit permission to do that. Again, there's some R Markdown trickery going on here. But if we were to run these, we can also see if we were to run this in the world where we did not give it the permission to, or any permissions, just a shorthand is to say false, then you would not have access to download or to query the total number of downloads because you did not give it permission to query the network. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about how metrics are derived here. So metrics in risk metric go through a few stages of derivation. We have assessments, metrics, and scores. And frankly, I get them confused at times. It seems to be a hurdle for a lot of people getting into the project. And we said, let's get rid of all of it. Instead of having this kind of categorization or stages of how things get derived, we only have data about packages. In one special case, we call them metrics, but really everything is just data about packages. And so the only additional caveats that we put is that if something is a metric, we enforce that its data type must be atomic. So atomics in R, this is, as or is atomic. This is a function within R, within base R. I'm not going to go into all the background information, but it's effectively your base data types like integers, doubles, character, logical, with a few other caveats. And we want simple data, things that we know we're going to be able to handle consistently. And they just have to tell us it's a metric. So that's really it. Everything else is treated the same. And if we look at the metrics that we have, we'll get this listing. And actually, this is just showing the things that are flagged as metrics. But we can also say metrics all equals true. And we'll get a longer list that includes things that don't have as rich of information because they're just kind of like transient data. Exactly, no more package metric classes. Yeah, you can see, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around simplifying the structure here. I know it's been a sticking point for some of the developers that have been working on this, so we're really happy to see things getting simpler. So yeah, anyway, there's a bunch of other information that is available. All of this is kind of internals. It's used to calculate some of the metrics, and they're all kind of treated more or less the same under the hood. Another place that we put in a lot of attention is extensibility. Really, when we wrote risk metric, we were hoping that people would build extension packages to add metrics. That didn't really materialize in the way that we were really hoping it would. And so in ValMeter, One, we kind of get a lot of this for free because S7 is really built to make to make generics more extensible. And so by leaning on S7 as the underlying class system for risk metric, we kind of get this for free. But also we put in a lot of attention into how we manage things. So let's see, a couple of these have dependency requirements, and that's something that's new. So for example, we do not take a hard dependency on our command check, but we will calculate our command check for you. But we'll tell you you need to install this package. So that also gives us a lot more flexibility to not take these all as hard dependencies, which at least CRAN imposes a cap on how many hard dependencies you can have. So this kind of gives us a escape hatch for adding more features without necessarily taking on a ton of dependencies. And like I said, there's a bunch more metadata. So those are really the major differences. If you're a developer and you're interested in getting involved, let us know. Now's the time to give us feedback on the architecture. We've had a few people kind of poking away at the tools so far, and the feedback's been pretty positive. But when there are any gaps that are identified, we really do appreciate those. So with that, I'm going to jump into adding a metric. I'm also aiming to we're going to do about 15 more minutes, I think, of like walking through code, seeing examples, talking through design choices and stuff like that. And then we're going to jump into questions. I think we're going to have plenty of time for the questions. So if you do have questions as we're going through code, and it would be easier to answer as we're going through it, I'm totally fine with people dropping questions in the chat, and we can kind of talk through things that way. So yeah, if it's immediately relevant as we're walking through something, feel free to ask. So yeah, I think I've already run all these vignettes in this session, so things are getting a little muddled over here, but we're going to walk through implementing a simple metric. I think it's actually, we're going to be implementing this one at the end. So you can see it's already implemented, so bear with me. I guess we could do the old session restart. Let's do clear all output. All right, no tricks. We're starting fresh. All right, let's see how this goes. I'm gonna click up here. Actually, let's test ourselves. Let's look at metrics, all equals true. Of course, we're so fresh that we haven't loaded our package. Cool. So yeah, this looks good. We don't see the ROSB. We'll talk more about what that is in just a moment. So we're starting fresh. We can run through all of these. If we want to implement a metric, I'm going to showcase what that looks like. If you've implemented a metric for risk metric, you'll immediately see that there are some differences. If you haven't, hopefully you're just impressed by how straightforward everything is. So if like we just did, we can see all of the currently implemented metrics. We're going to start by implementing, where do we say it? We're going to test the number of characters in the package's name. So we're just doing this for simplicity. It's not something we need any dependencies for. It's obviously not a great heuristic for how good a package is. There are great packages that have very short names. And thank you, Phil. And this is not necessarily meant to be a proper heuristic, but rather just to show the process. So here we can look at what metrics we have available. And we can already generate information about the package's name. That's a pretty trivial one. And so we can see that here, not a whole lot of information, probably self-explanatory. What that means is that when you're implementing a metric, you really just need a function like this. If we take a package object, we can query its name, and then we can just get the number of characters that are in the package's name. So it's pretty trivial, effectively one line of a function. But because we don't just want a function out in the wild, we also want some information about that, what that function is going to do for us. And so we wrap this in a little helper function called implement data. And we give it a name of the piece of data that we're going to derive. And we can also give it a lot of additional metadata. Here, I'm just giving it a title. similar to, package name just has a title. And so we can see what that looks like. And now when we look at all of our metrics, we can query for our new metric. Cool. It can be any data type, no constraints. And it would be derived, just using the number of characters. One of the cool features that we haven't mentioned yet is that this is kind of leaning on the back of S7 because we can just kind of create these new methods for different types of packages. We can create a random package, and everything that generates the data for that is just kind of like implemented as a method. So we can generate random package names. We can see what we get. Weighted accessible crisp. Okay. If we want to calculate the number of characters in that, we get 23. So it's not terribly like sophisticated doing the number of characters, but it was pretty trivial to actually go out and implement it. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate that. If we did want to make it a metric, there's additional information that we have to provide. So one second, just getting some noise on my mouse. This is better. Okay, so one of the other things, if we wanted to make this a proper metric, we can set metric equals true. And we can try to run that. Maybe we just add that line. We see that that's an argument, and we go ahead and try to run it. We're going to get an error. First of all, it's already implemented. So if you're doing development, you have to say overwrite equals true. Okay, let's follow its instructions. We say overwrite equals true. And here we get flagged for not specifying what type of data we are expected to receive. So metrics must have an atomic piece of data as their data class. And this is kind of nice. This is something that's very, very new for us. And it's actually quite different from how R usually works. Usually R just expects whatever the result of a function to be. That's what you get. It's duck typing, they sometimes call it. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it must be a duck. And so if you get a result from nchar back, whatever it is, that's the result. If you're able to operate on it like a character value, then it's a character value. But we want to be more precise because these types of things do manifest as like these little I don't know, pernicious bugs that are difficult for us developers. So we ask that people give this an atomic class that we can be more explicit about. And we can do that using S7 has these little categories that they use, these like class signifiers. I don't remember exactly what their terminology is, but it's this like class umbrella. And so we're going to call this a class integer. And once we do that, we're in good shape. So now we've overwritten our current definition. If you were implementing this in a package, you wouldn't need to do that because it only gets created once. But here we need to do that because we've already declared it. And we've given it a class. So that's the bare minimum that you need to actually implement a metric. And now we can ignore this all equals true business and just look at our metrics. And sure enough, we can see that it's registered. So yeah, that's effectively all it takes to implement a new metric. Of course, the complexity is all going to live in here. If you have a more sophisticated measure, if you're making web requests, parsing files, measuring code coverage, stuff like that is much more complicated than just a one-liner. But as far as registering the information, it looks like this. There's some additional things that are really nice. A longer form description we encourage people to add, and a few other things. But if you really just want to do the bare minimum, it looks like this. And this can live, I should mention, this can live in our package. You can contribute this back to us. Or if you as an organization wanted to develop your own metrics, you could create an extension package, just a package that uses our functions to register new methods. And you'll see this metric got added to like a global listing of metrics. So if you were to create this package, you load it, it loads our package as dependency, you're able to add in additional metrics without really doing like requiring that you contribute these directly upstream. So if you have proprietary metrics or like systems that you want to use in-house to like, I don't know, maybe one of the things that's really a good indicator is if this package has been used on a previous study and you have I don't know, some database in-house where you can look that kind of information up. you could implement this, that queries your in-house database, and that maybe that's a really good metric or something like that. So yeah, it's easy, makes it much easier to extend. But let's look at what this looks like in like a real world setting. So one of the things that we often get asked about is like, wouldn't it be nice if we could look at the vulnerability history for a package? And there's really good tools out there. Oyster's one. That's probably the canonical solution to this. We use ROSV in this vignette. It's a similar vulnerability database that just happens to be a little more charitable to non-authenticated database requests. So for the sake of a vignette, that works nicely for us. And so what we can do then is we can declare a suggested dependency on this ROSV package, and we can run through and create a new vignette or a new metric. So just to see what we're working with, if we use the ROSV package, we can query, in this case for Haven. I happen to know that Haven has, at one point in its history, it had a memory leak. And as far as vulnerabilities go, that is enough to warrant filing a vulnerability. I do have a note in here. Everyone should know that Haven is an amazing resource. This isn't to throw shade at the Haven package. This is just because I happen to know that that one has a vulnerability that's listed out there. So if we want to implement a new metric, we're going to do a lot of the same stuff. We're going to implement first the data that we want to pull. This is non-atomic. Data frames are not atomic data sets or data types. We're going to declare our suggested dependency. We're going to say that you need the network because we're going to query an external API to do this. We're going to say it's a data frame. In this case, it's an S3 class, so we don't need the like S7 fancy helpers. And we're going to say that we're only actually going to implement it for a CRAN repo resource. So this is a concept I haven't introduced yet, but similar to risk metric, there's kind of like categories of how package objects, what package objects represent. And they're represented by where information is allowed to come from. In this case, if you say that you want to refer to a package on CRAN, the resource that it pulls that information from is this CRAN repo resource. And so we're saying that we want to implement this, but we actually only care about implementing it for packages that come from CRAN. If you happen to have the same package installed locally, you have a local resource, it might not have the same vulnerabilities because it might not be the same package. It might just share the same package name. So we're very explicit about that. And so that's just one kind of caveat that we can put on this implementation, which means that we could do this. You could have a separate implementation for local resources or installed packages, but those would necessarily require different tooling to confirm this. And packages can draw information from multiple resources. So you could say, I have this package that's locally, I know I installed it from CRAN. We can also pull the same information from CRAN if they're, and like merge the two data. So anyway, just an aside on what this resource concept is. So we can do that. We're gonna use the exact same code that we used just before, but we're just populating it with these like variables instead of hard coding the Haven package. Cool, that ran just fine. So we can test it out. Here I'm saying this is our resource. We're going to point to Haven, the same version that we used before. We're going to pull it from CRAN, and we're going to give it blanket permissions because we said that we need network permissions to be able to calculate this. We run it and we get the same result that we did before. So that's working as expected. We can double check. Let's say that we just have a repo resource. Maybe this is bioconductor and there happens to be another Haven on bioconductor, some theoretical package. We could test this and it's going to say, okay, there's some error because we haven't actually implemented this for like arbitrary repos. So we're trying to be a lot more explicit about this information. That's what we're trying to communicate here. Nevertheless, if we tried to run it without those blanket permissions, we're also going to expect an error. Okay, you need to grant me network access. And similarly, if we didn't have our OSV installed, what would happen? In this case, it runs just fine. But let's see if we run it without. There's a little bit of magic in here. because this is our markdown magic. What you would see is this code, and what we would get is this output. What we're doing is just mocking some internal functions so that it behaves as though that package is not installed in my system, and we'd see this kind of message. You need to install the ROSV package in order to derive this one. So cool. Now that we have the data frame pulled, trying to figure out how many vulnerabilities we have is just looking at the number of rows. And that's very simple. This looks kind of like our number of characters in a package's name, just trying to implement a simple metric. And we can implement that, test it out, and we can see, okay, Haven has one reported vulnerability. So the implementation, the overall implementation ended up being not terribly difficult. And that's a feature that's been an outstanding request in risk metric for ages. I see, does it work with RUniverse and WebR? It should, or would this implementation work using CRAN? No, that would fall under kind of like this general repo resource. But certainly we could say that if there's a canonical RUniverse URL, we wanted to pull from that, then we could definitely pull from that too. But yeah, I think trying to, like another consideration in there that I think it would be interesting is that like we also look at the hash of the source code. That's something that you get when you pull a package from CRAN. And we could also use that to say, if you have an arbitrary repo resource, maybe we look at what the hash of that package would be on CRAN. If those two things are the same, then we're comfortable looking at the vulnerabilities from this database that's looking at CRAN. So that would be a way for us to say, okay, these two things have the same name, but are they really the same thing? We could confirm that, and then we maybe be more tolerant. This is just an example, after all. It's not like we were trying to implement this in the package. Maybe we would go through more lengths to try to accommodate more cases. But I did want to showcase, okay, you can be really specific with how you want to permit data to be derived, and you can derive it differently depending on which type of resources you might be pulling that information from. That's a really important kind of core concept. I think we got through everything. Oh, the last piece of this, we've already touched on this a little bit, but out of the box, you'll simulate metrics as well. So when we look at our vulnerability count metric, we know that that produces an integer data type. And so we will smartly say, we can generate random integers and we'll give you something. If you don't think that that is like accurate, you can also overwrite that with a specific method. For instance, downloads are also integers. And if we run this like 10 times, you'll see that they're always kind of like, 1 to 10 or something like that. I think it's a Poisson distribution or something. But if you wanted something like downloads, obviously 1 to 10 is probably not the range that you care about. So we might bump that up or implement something more specific. If you have multiple metrics built on the OSV data frame, such as max severity, absolutely, yeah. So that's kind of why we split out this internal data, this data frame. We cache that piece of information, but we could have as many metrics as we wanted that parse that in different ways and expose different information as metrics. Like our command check is also one of these where we internally, we just run our command check, we get this whole object out. But we can then slice and dice that, and we can say, oh, how many errors, how many warnings, how many notes do you have? Those could all be such separate metrics. We could also break that down into the individual checks that our command check does. And we can say, were you able to rebuild vignettes? That could be its own metric. We could like slice and dice it however we want. So yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, that's kind of why we do it this way, so that we don't have to rerun our command check every time that you want to tease out one of these individual numbers. We can kind of cache that information, implicitly calculate it on when it's needed, and then derive this type of information as easily with that cached value. Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit, you can also implement your own random number generator here. So if you have a mock resource, that's kind of the resource type that does the random number generation. You can implement your own implementation there. And what's cool about this is that we can then also see some distributions over those packages. We can see, now that we've generated 100 random packages, we can see what does that vulnerability count look like over all of those 100. And I think we have an example where we do this for things like download counts, which is pretty cool. Got another question in the chat, so I'm just going to read it out here. How will Val Repo capture and store evidence for transient metrics, such as timestamps, API payloads, or hashes? Maybe those are good ways of capturing that. So reports can be relayed to auditors later without network access. Yeah, that's a good question. The transient metrics is something that I think we're still kind of going back and forth on. Capturing a timestamp and saying this is how many downloads it had on this day, that is one thing that we've definitely thought about. Capturing API payloads, probably not. And I'll get to a reason for that in just a bit. Hashes, definitely, just like CRAN, we want to store information about the package source code hash. That's, at least in CRAN, it's reported as an MD5 sum. In our metric, or in our metric database, we also want to capture things like a hash for the all the dependencies that were installed when you calculated those metrics. And that might be only hard dependencies or suggested dependencies. We're trying to kind of like figure out what information would be useful to organizations that now want to like be certain that this is representative of how the package would behave if it was deployed in their system. So we're very mindful of those questions. Those are really good questions. I'm going a little over my 15 minutes that I allowed myself, but I think we're getting to a lot of questions that you just raised. So maybe I'll continue and keep throwing questions in the chat. I think this is a good dynamic. I'll keep reading them out, and I'm happy to answer them as we go. So talking a little bit more about the repository now, and great transition. We're going to talk about Valve Repo now. Another feature of ValMeter is that we're building it with the intention that it will be the backend for serving a package repository. So unlike like risk metric, we can of course pull that information out, we can push it into a repository, but we want this to be a really fluid process. And because we're retooling things, we kind of have some flexibility to do this. So we can generate a bunch of random packages coming off of the last vignette. We all know this at this point. We can just say, okay, give it blanket permissions. We're going to calculate all the metrics. We get some, reasonably representative data. We also generate cute names for all of them. I put more time than I care to admit to into trying to generate realistic R package names. So you can go in and see how many of these you can generate and get tickled by some of the fun names. I put a lot of attention to try and make sure that it does not produce anything offensive. So report bugs if you see them, but it should use only positive keywords. Yeah, feel free to play around with it. I take no responsibility for the names that it produces, but they should be pleasant. And also, if iGraph is installed, it will also generate, when you produce a DCF, this is a Debian control format file, and it's the same format that the packages file uses. So one of the nice things about this is that if you include iGraph, we'll also generate a set of reasonable package dependencies. So we can simulate like package dependency type things. Yeah, I know Eric knows these types of rabbit holes. Yeah, I know you've been there, Eric. So we can try that out. And you'll just see that we'll have some imports, we'll have some suggested packages, things like that. This is really nice because we do also want people to be able to curate packages based on the behavior of their dependencies. So this was an important feature for us. We want to simulate repositories and be able to use that to develop metrics that depend on things like the number of dependencies, or if one of your dependencies has too low of test coverage, maybe you want to throw it out. Something like that, or maybe just want to flag it. But we also want to raise that if there's like a high level package that you care about, how do we surface information about the dependencies that it has? So we're working on that as well. If we want to pull metadata from a repository, so we have this Debian control formatted file, similar to what CRAN would serve, and we can now convert that back into a set of packages. So it goes both ways. You can generate packages, and from that, you can generate a Debian control format that we could upload as a repository from that file. So really similar to how we would be pulling this information from CRAN, we can go right back into a package, a list of package objects. So what's cool about this, is that we get all of this same information. That might not be terribly useful to most people, but if you are generating documentation about these, it's really nice to have a object that now you can tease apart all this different metadata so that you don't have to go through and try to rederive, okay, these are logical values, those need to be parsed in a particular way, or something like that. We'll do all that heavy lifting for you. You will see that you lose some information. So we only have access to what information is here. So we don't know if you generated, here they're just randomly generated packages, but if this was a real package serve forecast, if you were to have derived this information coming from CRAN, then you upload it here, and then we download and parse it back out, we don't know that that originally came from CRAN, so this is now an unknown resource. Taking a break to read a question real quick. For our OpenSci or even some other projects that record life cycle, would that be pullable? Yeah, I think so. It would probably be a different resource. So that would probably be like a GitHub resource or something like that. Or I don't know, actually, sometimes those are in the package source code. So they usually would be in the RD files. So it's usually some people put the lifecycle badge on the top of the README for like the package as a whole. But if you're using the lifecycle package, often individual functions will have life cycles as well. We could do like, all mature functions or what percentage of functions are mature, things like that. So yeah, totally, we could do that type of stuff. I'll have to watch the recording later and document all these great ideas, file issues for myself. But yeah, we totally could. I think that's really useful information. That would be awesome. And it's just derived from the source codes. That would be pretty straightforward, I think. So we also, we can generate a full repository, which is pretty cool. So if we have, in this case, I'm just going to simulate 100 random packages, and I'll take a moment. We can see what that looks like if we were to spit out a DCF file. Okay, this is going to be big. We don't need to read through all of it, but trust me that there's 100 of these things here. And we can also parse that whole thing back into our list of packages. So just to show that, there's a lot of information here. We want to make this really easy to grab all this information. With all of that, eventually this will live, these will be real packages on our Val repo. But for right now, we're just simulating. But one thing I want to showcase is that we can start doing interesting things like curating based on percentile. So this is something that we weren't able to do in risk metric because we're always treating packages as individual. Here, since we're starting to think about packages as part of a collection, we can also start to look at things like the percentile of the number of dependencies. So if we look at all these packages, we have 100 packages, and I'm saying, okay, what are the top 5, the packages in the top 5%? And so we can see which packages those are, and we can start doing some analysis. So we can say, okay, what is like the median number of dependencies that a package has? Is this on like the, where does this sit in terms of the cohort? And especially for things like downloads, this is really useful. So we often get this question, like, I don't really care if a package has 1 million downloads. That's not really a number I have good intuition for. But what I do care about is it in the like top 20th percentile of packages by downloads? That's something that's maybe easier to grasp. So we want to be able to expose that type of information too. The last thing I want to showcase, this one is, if we just look back at our little rubric here, I guess my Chrome is about to restart on me. I think I have some time, but we'll see. Now we're just going to go through the README. I just wrapped it in a vignette, but if you go and check out this repository that we have, all of the code that I'm going to be running is in the README there. I did have to make one last minute update because I think we haven't updated this README since our since some new pull request to Valmeter. So I'm sorry that if you get a bug on this part, but it'll be fixed soon. Let me also do a session restart and just make sure that we're not inheriting any of the stuff that we did on the previous vignettes. So just like we did before, we're going to simulate a repository. This is a little different than simulating packages because we're actually emitting that packages file. So if we look at what repo is, it's not actually a list of packages anymore or the Debian control file. It's just a location on my local hard drive in the temp directory. If I list the files of that, now there's something kind of weird. I'm going to have to just get rid of this file prefix. The file prefix is important for using a local directory as a repository, but it is not appreciated by list files. So I just have to make sure that we get rid of it. We can see that we have a source directory. And if you know how CRAN or similar R package repositories work, they always will put this packages file in source contrib. And sure enough, we can see this packages file lives there. So that was all generated by this random repo. And if we look at that file, I'm not going to bother trying to hunt down this location on my hard drive right now. But if we were to look at that file, we would see a similar format to what we had in here. So we'd see something that looks more or less like this. So with that, you can actually set your repos to this like repo, like this file path that we just generated. It's going to look at that. And if we set available packages at that point, actually, we can just do that. Options repos equals repo. And if we did available packages, we can see we get a bunch of random packages, or 10, like we specified. So we can treat this just like a repository. The purpose of this is for demonstration, but you can imagine that you're pointing at a public repository, which includes a bunch of metadata. So we can set that as well. So we give it a repository. We're not going to see all the additional metrics in here because R, when it's pulling information from repositories, strips out anything that it doesn't know about. It only looks for specific fields. However, we can hook into its machinery to like allow you to get access to that information by giving it our own repo. We're going to say we're going to use this for packages. You know, typically this would be CRAN, right? CRAN repo. And then we'd say, okay, supplement CRAN with all of this metadata that we've already pre-calculated for you. But in our case, we're simulating the package repository and the metrics all in one go. So we use the same repo for both. And then we can start using these filters. So we can say, we give you this function that says package filter. If you know the names of the metrics, you can refer to them here. Otherwise, we can just run that. And we can say available packages. And we're going to start seeing all of our different metrics in here. So downloads, total, download, dependency count, has website. These are our command check error count. These are the things that we can start using in order to make decisions about packages. So just like here, I'm going to showcase what that looks like. And maybe it's easier to see if we do something like this. It's a little small, sorry about that. But we can see all the different metrics. One of the interesting things that happened already is that this repository column, and sorry if that's not entirely legible on your side. Let's see if we can make it a bit bigger. We've actually replaced the original file path where that package is supposed to be found with just a placeholder value. And R will bark at us and say that this isn't a valid file path, but it prevents us from installing that package because it runs against the rules that we set up for ourselves for what packages we want to use. And that those rules are defined based on this metadata. We do store the original repository where everything came from, so it is possible to get back to that, but it's not entirely necessary. We'll show what that looks like in just a second. So once we've set that up, here I'm just going to find the first package that has that filtered repository. We can see, okay, so this is just a package name, handy R. And if we try to install that, we get a message that looks like this. So we're trying to install, okay, into our site library. That's expected. But then we get this other error message that says this actually violates or is excluded from our repository due to the filter. It's actually looked at the package that we're trying to install and some of its dependencies. And we can see if we want to explain that package, or if we want to permit it as an exception, we have the options of doing that. So we could, yeah, go through those. I don't remember if we actually implemented this yet. We're going to find out. No, okay. So this just, I thought that this would, the intention eventually will be that this will actually tell you, okay, these are the parts of this filtering criteria that it maybe met or did not meet, and why exactly each of these packages did not meet that criteria. For now, it just lists them. And if you wanted to, you can kind of add these packages to an allow list. You want to say, okay, I know that these fall outside that case, but I know them to be high quality packages. Now I want to use them anyway. So yeah, that is everything I had prepared in terms of demos. With that, I want to talk a little bit briefly about the package repository. So we've touched on this a little bit. What is a package repository? If you set your packages to CRAN, you get this, you might say like you're going to the cloud.rproject.org. And if you try to install a package CLI, this is what it looks like. What happens is that you first go out and you try to use, you pull this packages file, R reads in all this metadata, and then you end up with a link to a tarball. So that's how CRAN, or that's how R natively goes on and fetches these packages. Now, what we're trying to do is we're intercepting that process to sideload all this extra metadata that you might find useful. And we're hoping to host that as what we call a metric repository or a metric database. And the idea is that both of those two things get joined when you request a new package. We just showed what this looks like when you go to install packages, but this could be an administrator, or this could be someone who's doing validation. They want to look at all the packages that are out there and then remove certain packages for certain reasons. So you might imagine, okay, we're going to share information about what image we use to generate those metrics. And if you say, okay, we're using a particular version of Rocker or Verse, if this doesn't match, we have one that's kind of out of sync here, we're going to throw out those metrics. We're not going to assume that those are representative in our cases, or maybe that's a newer version of R, something like, or an older version of R. You might also say, okay, maybe the version of the package that we pulled from CRAN doesn't match the version that the metrics were calculated against. You can decide, okay, maybe that doesn't apply. So we're going to actually throw those metrics out. We're going to treat that like everything's high risk. If it had an R command check error, of course, or if it has no testing, just using the metrics as they are. And so we're hoping to provide you with enough reproducibility metadata and enough metrics that you can make as informed a decision as possible about whether or not those packages are suitable for your use. And when you go to use them in an R session, then either an administrator has applied this holistically and only permits you a certain set of acceptable packages to install, in which case this probably wouldn't be an issue. Or if you have access to all of CRAN and you've maybe set this in like your R profile, those are the sets of constraints that you want to apply, then when you go to install a package, you'll get this message. Actually, that falls outside the set of packages that you're allowed. You might be asking, okay, that's great. These public packages are available. How do I add in additional information? Before I touch on that, I see a question. So how will val repo, oh, sorry, my chat's jumping around. This gets really nasty when you start to think about what underlying version of RCPP was installed. Totally agree. Yeah, that's one of the big challenges for us. One of the saviors of this problem, and we'll see how well this ends up addressing it, is the Many Linux project, which I've been very closely following. So the Many Linux project, it makes entirely statically compiled binaries for all the packages. So any system dependencies that you might have that are required for building the package, you no longer have all those system dependencies. So that might be our saving grace in trying to tackle that particular question. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Phil, for sharing. I think it's a really cool project. So that might really alleviate a lot of the headaches that we've been having trying to figure out how we manage this for system dependencies. You could also imagine that I'm sure there's orgs that are out there. I'm thinking primarily about like CROs, organizations that really do not have the bandwidth of setting up really bespoke infrastructure, where us putting out something that's running against a Rocker image, that is maybe enough for the level of like complexity that they can really bite off for this type of a problem. So there's certainly a use case, I think, where things even have some misalignment. We're not necessarily here to tell you we're trying to match your system exactly, but we are trying to give you enough information to decide where that line is and whether or not what we're doing falls within scope. Or if you need to recalculate them, we also want to provide the tools so that you could do that yourself. So just to talk a little bit about the ways that this can be extended, here I'm representing our metric database in blue. If you have in-house packages, which I'm sure many orgs do, the intention is that we want our tools also to be very transferable. So we want these to be accessible to the point where you could spin this up in-house and generate one of these packages files, serve it as a repository like you would, like we are for our metrics. And you can just join those by adding multiple repositories, similar to how you would add CRAN and your in-house repository already when installing packages. We can also lean on other organizations that are doing amazing work, like Camus, to characterize packages from a statistical perspective. We don't see it as our, like within scope for our project to be telling people what is or isn't appropriate statistical implementation or methodology. But groups like Camus are starting to tackle those types of questions by comparing implementations across languages. And that means that if we want to say, okay, maybe we can create a metric that's just whether or not Camus has cross-checked the results of this method implementation with another language, maybe that's a really good indicator, and we can flag which of those packages these are. Also, some organizations come back to us and they say, okay, great, you can calculate test coverage, but maybe it's too low, but we still want to use the package and we need to add some additional tests. Or maybe we don't trust that that package is tested against our type of data is another kind of like fear that I sometimes see. So if people want tests reproduced with like CDISC style data, that's okay. We also want to be supportive of those types of use cases. So you can, of course, add your own metrics and surface these as an additional repository. And we'll merge all those metrics together. And you can then use those as additional filtering criteria. So I'm going to end here. That went longer than I was expecting, but I hope it was useful. We're getting good questions, so I feel like this is already bleeding into discussion. How to get involved? pharmaR.org is our website. Check us out there. We use the Linux Foundation as kind of the organizing platform for us. They have their own developer portal, so you create an account and you can see our calendar there. And that actually gives you access to the R Consortium Slack as well. So we're pretty active there. If you are not a developer type or don't really want to be joining meetings, we really appreciate feedback, especially at this stage in our project where we are trying to make sure that we're anticipating all the needs that different companies might have. This is really the time to be vocal if there's something that you think we're missing. If you adopt our tools, that's even better because we're very happy to give you early support, early feedback, make sure that we're going to be an approachable solution for what you have in mind. And now is when the project is at its most malleable. So if you need specific things, if you get in early, this is the time to influence the direction that we have. And finally, if you're not in a position to adopt our tools, you maybe don't have the bandwidth to participate, the next best thing is to advocate. So reach out if you'd like to learn more, but going around and letting people know that this is going on, referring people to our project when you think the use case applies, that is all super helpful. So if nothing else, just being here, knowing about our project, and letting other people know what's going on, we really appreciate that too. So with that, we're going to try to like transition from this being a unidirectional talk to being more of a discussion. And so I'm going to ask everyone who's still hanging around to at least say hi in the chat, just to kind of get the juices flowing a little bit as we try to transition this. Once we move more into a discussion, if you'd like to ask a question, you're welcome to keep doing that in chat. I'll keep reading them out, but if we want to make this a little more personal or personable, then I think it would be really nice to have other people chiming in. And to do that, you need to raise your hand, and one of the organizers will add you to the panel discussion so you can come off mute and ask a question, and we can have a bit more of a conversation. So if I can get everyone asking, or at least saying who they are, where you're from, and what you're interested in, I think that will help. Can I provide the slides? I see that question. Absolutely. I don't have a link for you right now, and I don't want to go juggle that while I'm sharing my screen, but I will be able to share it. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. There were a couple maybe additional questions that came in as you were wrapping up there. I'm not sure if you tackled the one from Ramnath yet about dependency trees.
Oh, I missed that one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for calling that out. I might ask Eric if you can start reading, at least to get another voice
Yeah,
going on.
I'll be glad to ask
All right,
this.
I'm going to ask you to read questions then.
You got it. That's what I'm here for. So
Cool.
Ramnath asks, how will filters handle dependency trees? For example, if a top-level package passes, but yet a transitive dependency fails, well, it fails a metric, can we surface a clear rationale and an allow list workflow with provenance for that kind of exception?
Yeah, so we don't have this implemented yet, but we do intend to have, like, let's see, if we hop back over to our filter example. Here I'm flying entirely by the seat of my pants. So let's try to brainstorm what syntax could look like. It could be like, the percentile of the downloads has to be greater than 25%, and let's say all dependencies have to have a percentile of downloads total greater than 0.25, something like that. That's kind of how I'm imagining it. So there'll probably be some syntax that looks something like this, where, if you're using these fields, it applies in most cases to the package that you possibly be filtering, but then there's some kind of like constraint that you can apply to say, okay, now start looking at all of the dependencies, or maybe it could be like all reverse dependencies, something like that. You could think about all the different relationships between packages. We could say maybe instead of all dependencies, it's like order equals 1, only first order dependencies. We can get as creative as we'd like. We have a lot of flexibility within this framework to kind of extend that to accommodate different types of analyses. It's not baked in yet, but as those use cases come up, we're definitely thinking about them.
Excellent.
If you have, I was just going to say, if you have a really explicit use case where your org really needs this feature, let us know. I haven't had any orgs come to us. I think this is one of those things where like technical people are always like, oh, that would be really cool. We can start doing graph analysis and stuff like this. In practice, I haven't seen the need yet. So that's why it's not a burning priority. But I'm one of those technical people. I think it would be really cool. I'm not sure I've seen the need yet.
Yeah, it's something that's going to be a case-by-case basis, and maybe it's one of those things, technically speaking, it's good to explore, but then practically speaking, an organization may not exactly stumble upon all that need just yet. But yeah, if anyone knows about diving on those rabbit holes, I know exactly how that goes. And by the way, Doug, you would be a perfect companion for a live stream someday. You've nailed this, so you're awesome at this. We got another I'm not sure of a question or more for an acknowledgement, but who was asking this was saying this is quite interesting. But Bruce apparently is coming from an IT compliance perspective, and I'll paraphrase here, but if a company has an internal SOP that they're either developing or revising with respect to adopting open source packages that the metrics associated with a frozen type of package repository would make a lot of sense to summarize these for compliance purposes, and especially around GCP compliance. So lots of kudos for this effort. It sounds like from a IT side of things too.
That's perfect. Yeah. I mean, we see the use cases being like it's a multitude of use cases, I should say. I'm treating this like I'm an analyst and I'm setting constraints for myself, but absolutely, like I work at a large organization, and I know that like I have also support the like IT folks that are looking at this from a compliance perspective, and this is part of the goal also is that we can do this systematically. If you were if your IT org is the part of the company that manages the packages that are available, then we also want these tools to be accessible to that audience. You know, IT people, I think it's pretty rare that they have an R background, and so we want these tools to be pretty approachable also from an IT perspective, so that if you had to build a business process around this, an IT person could, you know, in a probably an afternoon, come up with a script that figures out which packages need to be mirrored from an external source and, you know, build a compliance ready internal mirror of something like CRAN. So that's absolutely a use case that we have in mind.
Excellent. And it does sound like there may be some interested collaborators about this in the future to join the hub. So that's
Yeah,
perfect.
absolutely. I think like one of the things we'd like that we're aiming for is to have a set of either like scripts or playbooks, or you know, I don't know if you're in IT and a particular format would be helpful here, let us know. But we'd like to have some recommendation on how to spin this up if you're an IT or if you're in the IT branch and you want to spin up something like this to administer like an in-house product. We want to have those tools as off-the-shelf ready as possible. So yeah, let us know if you have that use case.
Now, I'm not necessarily IT, but I'll put on my DevOps hat for a second here. I could say that a vision of, say, an Ansible playbook or a chef recipe or something with Terraform would cover a lot of needs for like an automated setup to bootstrap all this. So I think that would be a great call out to the community out there if they want to join the team to, you know, shape the direction of automated installation, which is something I'm thinking about from obviously the containerization perspective and the I was about, oh yeah, the environment perspective, even for just testing a submission ready package. A lot of parallels with what you're proposing here.
100%. Yeah. Um, let's see. I did see another question. Let's see. Where was that? Sorry, my chat window is like bouncing around as new people are
Yeah,
posting
let me
stuff.
see. There was some from Jared that just came, but I want to make sure I didn't miss anything before
Oh,
that.
the one I was looking at was about internal POSIT package manager doing metrics.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
which is a great question. We've been pretty vocal about this being the direction that we wanted to head in for a while. And what's nice about working in the public is that POSIT sees all of this stuff and they say, "Wow, you know, we can help make that easy with our product." So I know it's been like a year and a half now since they allowed arbitrary metrics to be shown in Package Manager. And I was talking with Joe from Posit, who manages, I think it's oh man, I'm gonna get his title wrong, but he's you know, very involved in the Posit Package Manager product. And one of the things I was asking is, you know, would it be possible to serve this information in this packages file as well, all those metrics? In which case, we could say, you know, you could pull these metrics from our repository when you're mirroring it into something like Posit Package Manager. Those metrics would be visible on the package page, but then also you get that directly in line with the packages that you're hosting, and you could use that as your filtering criteria. So you would no longer, as a user, need to think about trying to like marry this database and this set of packages coming from CRAN or your in-house mirror. That would all be in the one-stop shop. So that seems like something that the Posit folks are interested in. I don't want to overpromise for them or guarantee that any of this will ever see the light of day, but like we're in close discussion with them. They have some excitement for what we're doing and want to be supportive of it. So definitely, if you think that there would be value in those features, let them know, because I'm sure that that makes its way toward prioritizing features that help support our work too.
Yeah, it looks like Brian maybe wanting to chime in here. Let's see if the magic works here. Brian, yeah, feel free to chime in with your comments. Thanks for
Do
joining
you
us.
hear me?
You sure can, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Doug, thanks so much. I know a while ago there was talk of having tests of packages or tests of libraries and having pharma companies potentially collaborate on what those tests would be and things like that. Has the validation hub just sort of not looked at that or like put it on the low burner and it will come back or um
Yeah, I think um, our philosophy so far has been that we want to be supportive of that use case, but we don't see ourselves being the group to organize those. If there is an initiative that spins up and says we want to supplement all these packages with additional tests, I could see us being like a nice home for that. But so far, like in the best case, I think that there's like individuals with one particular package of expertise, and they maybe want to supplement it, and we're not exactly sure how best to supplement those. Like in my view, if we're writing additional tests for an open source package, the best thing to do is to contribute those tests back to the package itself. In which case, we're already calculating those tests through code coverage and things like that. As far as side loading goes, we see that as kind of like a way to solve the problem that addresses the need to have additional tests that are kept private. And so that is kind of necessarily a part of a place where the problem becomes like an organization's way of extending a test suite. So that hasn't necessarily been our focus.
right. Okay. Yeah, it's just trying to move away from package by package. And like the
Oh,
unit
okay.
tests cover that within the package. And like CRAN does, it'll, if it has an update to a package, it'll run the tests for all of its dependent packages or maybe reverse dependent packages as a way to make sure that it hasn't broken something upstream. And so this is kind of moving even beyond that. Like here's the library, here's our frozen set of packages and versions. Do they all work correctly together?
Yeah, I see. I see. I think I misunderstood some of the detail of your question then. Yeah, so we're definitely thinking about how packages impact other packages when they're updated. Luis is on the call. We were just talking actually at a meeting, a team meeting for the R Validation Hub earlier today about what it would look like to do reverse dependency testing, similar to CRAN. I know that's like, it sounds like what you're thinking of is even one step further, like
Yeah,
assuming that there's this like spooky action at a distance between packages that could cause, any package could cause some other package to break.
right.
I think, yeah, rerunning, I probably, if we wanted to solve that problem, what it would look like is it would be baked into kind of the governance of a repository like this. So maybe like once a quarter, we say, this is a long-term support kind of release or whatever the terminology will be.
Right.
We are going to start fresh. We're just going to take that whole snapshot and we're going to run literally all the tests for it. Something like that. On a rolling basis, I think the reverse dependency style is probably the most actionable.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And anyone else on the chat that wants to chime in, just raise your hand and we'll get you off mute. But lots of great insights. And I can't remember who brought it up, but Doug, one thing to think about is, yeah, the effort of the multiverse is still quite new, but that could be that kind of nice proving ground for stability, but yet kind of not completely tied to CRAN. So I think that's a space worth watching too.
Yeah, and I think I forget what their terminology is in our multiverse. Do they call it prod? I forget what uh their
Yeah, there's like
release versions are.
like the prod is the main branch that has these like time-based snapshots, but then there's a more dev side of it that much like in our universe itself, anytime I update my package on say GitHub or whatever repository, it's automatically refreshed there too.
Yeah, so we could do something like that where we similarly honestly, we would probably try to track their release cycle as much as possible, or lags shortly behind, because then we could also take the R multiverse as an input to the way that we're calculating metrics. So that way we kind of just cover more of the package landscape.
Absolutely. Yeah, Brian, thanks for the clarification. They do quarterly
Yeah.
snapshots on their side. Yep.
Cool.
Very good. All right. Not seeing any particular new ones other than some clarifications on the type of qualification it looks like from the business side versus.
I had some backup questions. The usual
do it.
suspects
Yes.
prepared here. It's going to be more than we have time. I didn't necessarily want to run through these as like a laundry list, but if anyone sees anything, if this sparks any interesting questions from anyone, I'm happy to take the conversation in that direction too.
Yeah, it may be kind of related to one of these, but you mentioned, thinking carefully about how the collective data as a whole is going to be shared amongst others, I believe. When can we expect to get some more information on what the group is aligning there?
Yeah, so we already have a pretty comprehensive set of packages that have already been evaluated.
Sure.
Is that what you're asking, Eric?
Well, I thought you meant there was going to be like kind of a database out there, or maybe that's related. I may have misheard it, but something to that.
Yeah. So when I say database, so this packages file is kind of a database. I know it's
Sure.
like it's the most like spuriously formatted database if you want to use it for like proper data storage. But if you're only using it for storing these atomic data sets or data types or package information, it's quite a good database. So that is kind of the format that we're thinking of. And when we're thinking about hosting that, that's what I meant by that, is that we want that
Gotcha.
file to be out there available for people to query.
Awesome. Yeah, as long as it's out there in the open, we can all find creative ways to
you could totally imagine like we could put a layer on top where it's like queryable with SQL or something like that. That would be cool, but right now we're just trying to get the nuts and bolts put together.
Yeah, we don't need to over-engineer everything right away. We can do that later. Ramnath has an interesting point, although I'm not quite sure the context. He's saying he's really interested in more about in-house large language models. From your number 4 here. Any
Cool.
discussion around that point?
So yeah, thinking about LLMs. I mean, I don't have answers to all of these. I threw these up because these are questions that we get often, not because they're questions that I have perfect answers to. But yeah, LLMs I think are an interesting challenge for validation. One of the ways to look at this is the same way that we treat any package. So when we look at a new package, let's say a stats modeling package, what we're looking to prove is like, okay, does this thing do what it says it's going to do on the tin? And can we show evidence of that? Now, LLMs are tricky because what they say they'll do is they'll, or what they market themselves to be able to do, let's say, is provide you expert level guidance. And that's one interpretation. But I think more realistically, if you're looking at this from a purely software perspective, what they do is that like these packages return the response from some API request. And if you're only thinking about it from that perspective, like will an LLM package return the response to some prompt, then yeah, we can probably validate it to do that. Can we validate it to say that all the material that it produces is also accurate? Almost certainly not. And so that's probably a totally different way of looking at the problem. And if you have ideas on how we could characterize LLMs so that we could validate the information that they give, that I think is a much bigger problem. I'm not sure that we're prepared to tackle that one yet.
I agree. I think there's a lot more moving in this space that we need to be cognizant about, especially what we learned earlier in this conference. A lot of interesting ways we could maybe build custom agents or fit for purpose models that can be more tuned to this particular aspect and not try to be the jack of all trades, so to speak, with this. Brian mentions in the chat, he feels like LLM testing is more like data pipeline testing. It's more observability than reproducibility or expectation. But then you need criteria for when the response is out of bounds. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally
I
agree.
think that, and that might be more of like that might be a totally different way of thinking about validation. That might be something where um, you internally at your organization, however you have an LLM hooked up to your workflow, maybe, yeah, hopefully you're collecting some information about whether a like prompt or a response was accepted, or you have like thumbs up, thumbs down, this was a good response or a bad response. Maybe you have some guardrails on like what percentage of accepted solutions are acceptable. I would also love to see some organizations collecting information on like how often or how frequently code that's added by AI tools needs to be further edited. I think that that's a great heuristic, like the code churn heuristic, I think is sometimes called. Actually, Luis and I were chatting about that over social media just recently, asking like, is there a way that we can codify AI responses as like separate Git commits? I think that would be really helpful for starting to do some retrospective analysis on like whether or not AIs were constructive in the development process of code. So whether or not that's like an R package or like an analysis piece of code.
Yeah, bit of a side tangent, but if any of y'all are on Mastodon, give Doug a follow. He posts some great content. I love seeing you on my timeline there. Yep. And Bruce says this would be like iterative validation. The data has a baseline to an LLM or AI, and the data for the learning knowledge base should and will constantly change. Limits would need to be set for validation re-execution of testing. Yep.
Yeah,
Agree
it's
there.
a huge topic. I don't think we can, I think at best, the way that we're thinking about validation only applies to the fact that it's making API requests.
Yes.
If you want to start thinking about it in terms of like, how do you verify the content that's coming out of it, that's a totally different ballpark. So, I mean, that's definitely we're happy to produce tools that help support that process, but we're really not in a place where we feel comfortable characterizing it to the point that where we feel we can start building those tools yet. So if you have those use cases and there's a way that you think it would be useful to characterize, like an Elmer tool or something like that, we would definitely be supportive of building extension packages that might, allow you to put some other kind of constraints or log metadata or whatever would be useful on top of that.
Yeah, and maybe not quite the LLM side of things, but I definitely agree with where you're getting at in your number 8 item here, where a lot of us are in the statistics side of the function and leading these efforts, but in order to really bring change in an organization, you've got to have a good partnership with your quality group as well. And you don't want it to be an adversarial relationship, and because things can happen when that is. But we're definitely trying, especially with some white paper that Paulo Berg and I are leading off. We would love to have contributions from many different parties from the quality side on how the validation discussion can go from a quality perspective. I think that would be really important here.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been like this was one of the guiding principles of why we wanted to separate out the filtering criteria from Valmeter entirely. We want that to be a really intuitive tool to use, where effectively the code that you're using to write out your filter feels like code that's interpretable to a non-programmer, so that your quality people can look at, this they can look at this type of a condition and, okay, so it is code, but hopefully it's reasonably intuitive code that a quality person could be like, okay, if I understand what our command check is, and I can like map this to what we specified in our compliance documentation or something like that. And I can see the pieces coming together and aligning with like a business process. So that is a big part of it, is like making this more interpretive for your quality audience.
Great. And I'm literally doing response to Aaron and chat asking for more about that white paper after I put a link to the GitHub repo, which will have a lot more resources on. But we started this for the R Pharma Summit back at PosiConf. I did Apollo and I did a joint presentation, which I can get the direct link to that too if you want to get involved. And yeah, we'll be talking about that more in the upcoming R Pharma work streams. So very good. Looks like we got about 5 minutes left officially. Doug, do you have any other points you want to touch on yourself before we adjourn here?
Maybe I'll just close then. So yeah, a special thanks to everyone. This has been it's been a really lovely discussion. I appreciate everyone who's chimed in, especially those that are asking questions along the way. That's been really helpful. I think this has been it's felt a lot more engaged for me, and I hope it has been for you too. Of course, special thanks to R Pharma, the organizers, and for extending the invite to have us talk here. And of course, I'm here presenting, but we've had a few people hanging around in the chat. I mentioned Ileana, Luis, Aaron hanging out in the chat. They are all heavily involved in our validation hub. And there's plenty of others. We have a bunch of folks in Europe where this is not necessarily a convenient time to be tuning in, and a bunch of people abroad. So it's really kind of a village that it takes to build all these tools and plan for all these use cases, coming out to these types of events and gathering feedback. So we really do appreciate the engagement at these. Again, we have you can join our mailing list at our contact page. I mentioned the Linux developer platform, lfx.linuxfoundation.org. And with a account there, you can sign up on our Slack. So if you do want to get involved, the best place is really to just get a Linux account, join our Slack, and just say hi. We'll help direct you to where you can be starting to contribute.
Yeah, and as you mentioned throughout this workshop here, you got lots of different ways to contribute. It doesn't always have to be through code, right? It can be lots of different interactions or adjustments here.
Absolutely. So yeah, thanks everyone. I think we'll call it there.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of our committee here, thank you so much, Doug, for preparing these terrific materials. And again, you're a natural for future live streaming efforts with everything you threw there, even on the first try. So thank you again. And we will have the recording out for this probably within a month or so. Look forward to hopefully seeing you all for the workshops tomorrow and the APAC track tonight. Until then, we will catch you later. Thank you so much.